Hey everyone, David here with yet another review for this week's Walking Dead. This time it is for episode 6, I believe, for season 4, entitled Live Bait. Finally, we have gotten away from the one-worded titles for these episodes that all start with the letter I. And it's kind of appropriate because this episode completely separates itself from what's been going on in The Walking Dead, in Season 4 for The Walking Dead so far. Now, I haven't been mentioning it that often in these reviews, but for the sake of keeping people that have not been watching The Walking Dead away from these videos, warning, there are going to be spoilers to follow for this episode. So stop watching now, go watch the episode, come back, and we're going to talk about it. So as you know, we learned at the end of last week's episode that the governor has returned. However, what this episode decided to do is to go ahead and not show directly what happens after his return at the end of last week's episode. No, instead, flashback. The beginning of the episode starts off, I know I use this show so frequently as a comparison, especially recently because I just love the friggin' hell out of it. And that is, of course, Breaking Bad. It took a page from Breaking Bad's notebook about taking a moment from from a previous season or a previous episode of the show and go ahead and flashback to it and then show the aftermath of what happened after that particular scene, what we didn't see, what happened behind the scenes. And basically the episode starts off with what the governor ended up going to right after he massacred those people from Woodbury on the road. And it is clear that the guys that he left with know that this guy has gone bananas, and they leave him to, it's practically a mutiny. They leave him to rot, and he wanders off for a couple of months, as he says, and boom, we get mustache, beard, long hair. What I wanted for the governor, and it's here, and I loved it. I kind of figured that I find facial hair so fascinating because I can't grow one. And during his little exodus, he comes across this family, and he gets taken in by them. And at this point, you can easily tell the entire episode is going to be about the governor and the governor only. Rick and the group and the flu and the prison, completely non-existent in this episode. It's all about the governor. He is the main character for this entire episode. And I loved it because, wow, I did not think it was possible, but for the first time since his introduction in Season 3, we actually sympathized for the governor. This is the episode that humanizes the governor. You will not be able to feel for the governor the same way, regardless of what he's gonna do or what he kind of has already done by alert, because it's kind of easy to tell that he has been the one who has been luring the walkers to the prison with the rats and everything by the fence. Despite that, now you're kind of thinking to yourself, why is it that he's doing that? Because there's got to be a reason for why he's doing those things. Because after this episode, there's got to be a legitimate reason for why he's still screwing with the people in the prison. Because after this episode, I will not be able to see the governor the same way again, because he was just so humanized and he was so sympathetic, and I was actually rooting for the governor. I kept trying to remind myself, this is the guy who murdered all those people at the end of Season 3, who, just has done an awful lot of things. He beat up, or indirectly beat up, Glenn. He gave Glenn the impression that he messed around with Maggie when he held them captive. This is that same guy, and this is not a flashback before Woodbury because he's got the patch. The patch served as a reminder that this is not a flashback before Woodbury. This is after the events of Woodbury, after the events of Season 3, where the whole thing with Michonne already happened. So this is still that guy that did all those terrible things, but here you are rooting for the guy because he has officially sunk bottom. He has nowhere to go. So to him, having depleted health, depleted mentality, it's a fascinating character. This entire episode is a fascinating character study, to see this guy, like I said, hit rock bottom and build himself up by attaching himself to this family, and to seeing a very obvious connection with his family through this little girl who obviously reminds him of his own daughter. And if I would have to nitpick this episode, it would be that thing with the daughter, of how this little girl reminds him of his daughter, we've seen it before. It's something that is not necessarily original, but because it's written so well. I mean, I don't know if these were different writers than from the previous episodes, or if it is, then wow, they managed to strike a little niche with this episode, with the governor especially. But the writing and the exchange of dialogue between the governor and this little girl, and the way it's portrayed and the way that it's acted. By the way, wow, David Morrissey is definitely the Giancarlo Esposito of The Walking Dead. And Giancarlo Esposito, for those of you who don't know, played Gus Fring, the guy who ran the Boyos Hermanos chain in order to hide his criminal methamphetamine empire. He is that character for The Walking Dead. In fact, it's kind of odd that he gets introduced in season 3, and for the most part in season 3 he is that villain that the guys have had to go up against. But here we are in season 4, where he's being fleshed out more than I could have imagined for him to be fleshed out. And the actor himself delivers just an amazing performance. David Morrissey just knocked it out of the park in this episode. And you have raised the bar here, David. From a fellow David to another, we're not expecting any less than that from now on. But what I also loved is that it wasn't all just bed and roses. There were some shoes that were going to be dropped. First off is one that is eventually going to be dropped, more than likely in the next episode. And one is, of course, his real identity. He tells the family that his name is Brian something. And we can obviously tell where that's going, especially because of how this episode ended with the little reunion of the governor with his wingman there, the Hispanic dude. I don't know what his name is. I never really liked the character anyway. But they finally reunite at the end of this episode, and we can kind of tell that that's the direction that the next episode is going to go. But we can tell that this is going to cause a great friction within the family that he has managed to grow attached to. And I'm definitely looking forward to how this is going to play out. And I'm nervous about it because I actually like this family. I was getting, a little worried that, we're going to have another little, that spunky girl who has the gun and says, "Hey, buddy, I'm watching you." Another Andrea, And we were going to have another girl who, they're obviously opposites of each other. One is like, "Hey, if you mess with my family, I'm going to kill you." And the other is like the more sentimental one, where if she becomes a little too sentimental, that might be her undoing. Which I thought was actually going to happen for the first 10 or 15 minutes or so of this episode. Because, again, this is the same guy who did all those terrible things in season 3. So for the entire first 10 or 15 minutes or so of this episode, every time the governor grabbed either a fork or a porcelain cup, I was just nervous because I thought that he was just going to use any one of those things to take this family out, ransack the place for supplies, and be on his way. I was expecting that to happen at any moment, but lo and behold, it doesn't. And the direction they took with his character was amazing. And the fact that by the end of this episode, I really enjoyed seeing these characters, this family that he comes across to, and actually care for these characters, makes me nervous for when, like I said, the proverbial shoe is going to drop when his true identity is revealed, when these two guys come forward and say, "Hey, Governor, long time no see, blah, 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 blah," in the next episode. It makes me nervous for that, and I love that. The only other scene that also reminded me of how there's still that other part of the governor still lurking in there, despite having been softened by this family, is of course when the grandfather dies of lung cancer, and he comes back and he shows the savagery that he has managed to achieve, especially by the end of season 3 when he massacred all those people. And I love just, because this would have been a moment where I'm like, okay, I can tell that was going to happen. But because, again, it's written so well and it's acted very, very well, it hit me. It hit me seeing the girl who was all brave with the gun, covering her ears, like, "Oh my God, it's happening." And the little girl getting scared because this is the guy who she was looking up as a father because of how her father left and he never came back, and she thought that it was him. I fell for it. I actually felt because of how much I cared about all these characters. I'm still flabbergasted by the fact that I was actually caring for the governor. It's crazy, especially when he goes on that run to find the gas tank, the oxygen tank for that grandfather. And I was actually rooting for the governor to get out of there alive. I'm like, no, you gotta go. And I was becoming a little worried that once again we weren't gonna have an awful lot of good zombie kills, especially when he's going through that run looking for that oxygen tank, and he's mainly avoiding all of them. He's just pushing them. I think he only stabbed like one or two, but other than that, he just made off with 2 oxygen tanks without actually doing any cool kills. So I was being a little worried about that, but hey, they got us covered at the end of this episode. Even though it was only with about 3 walkers in that little ditch, wow, that was amazing. And I love that they went with practical effects, because the whole time I can easily tell that we're using practical effects, no CGI, because so far in this season there's been moments where they stick something through a zombie's head, and you can kind of tell that not only the rod going through their head, but also the blood that's splurting out is CG and it's computer animated and whatever. Here they used practical effects, and never before in the show have I been amazed. Well, at least not for a very long time, since probably like season 1, where we've seen an awful lot of practical effects with the guts and everything. Have I seen such amazing effects? It was awesome. It was gory, guy getting his jaw ripped off. That was my favorite. It was awesome. It was very reminiscent of Saw, of the Saw movies. Saw, Bear Trap. It was just great, and I loved seeing it. It was amazing. My only nitpicks about the episode, and trust me, there are nitpicks, because everything else is just so great that these things hardly affect the episode. And they would be these. One, again, the thing with the little girl reminding him of his own daughter is something that we've seen before, but it's certainly done really, really great in this episode. And I found it kind of awkward of how the governor hooked up with that girl next to that girl's sister and that girl's daughter right there. I mean, I understand that they're sleeping, and I understand that they haven't seen the opposite sex for a couple of months. It brought me back to 127 hours, where after being stuck between a rock and a canyon for now 2 or 3 days, Aaron manages to catch a glimpse of a girl in her bathing suit and the camera that he had, and he's like, it's understandable, because from a viewer perspective, you're kind of like, okay, why are you doing that? But then you put yourself in their shoes, and you're kind of like, well, you don't look that bad, so why not? But what I found disturbing was that they're right next to family members. That's just awkward. Even if they're sleeping, for me, that's just awkward. And the ending, I thought it was just, once again, a bit too convenient that his right-hand man was the one who planted that ditch filled with walkers. It was a traditional governor trap, so it's obviously something that his henchmen managed to learn from him. But I did think that it was a little convenient that he managed to run into the same kind of trap designed by his very own henchmen. Other than that, I love this episode. This is probably the first episode in the season that I would not mind watching again. And it's definitely a game changer, because like I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to look at the governor the same way again after this episode. And you can easily tell that this is like the part 1 to a 2-part little arc with the governor before we finally cut back to the prison, because I wouldn't be surprised if the next episode ends up being just about the governor as well. But for the time being, I love this episode. I'm going to go ahead and give it probably my highest score for the season so far, and that's going to be a 9.3 out of 10, which is an A. I'll be back next week with my review of episode 7 of season 4 of The Walking Dead. But until next time, guys, see you later.